Good day to everyone. My name is Alexandra Carter, and I work with the Office of Community Development as a program manager with the Louisiana Watershed Initiative. I'm really excited to be participating in today's workshop, so thanks everybody for joining us. See if I can get my slides to work. There we go. As part of today's workshop, I plan to provide an overview and update on the Louisiana Watershed Initiative, its challenges, some status on the funding sources, and program updates as we work with our state and local partners to go from data to decision making. We'll take some questions too there at the end or as part of the workshop. Let's talk about the Louisiana Watershed Initiative. Right. It's important to acknowledge that while I'm presenting solo today on behalf of the Office of Community Development, I represent a much larger effort that, incorporates feedback, input, and consensus of all the 5 state agencies represented here. So that's including the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development. None of this work would be possible without all of us working together. I think you'll see this as I talk about this in the presentation. A lot of the work that we're doing is pretty hard. We have really strong leadership in our governor. We all understand that it requires more work and that it's risky. But throughout this presentation, I hope that y'all can see and share with us the value that it's the right thing to do. We're fortunate to also work with representatives from the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, some federal partners, the USGS, FEMA, and CORE, and some of the universities, specifically the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, Tulane University, and the Water Institute of the Gulf, and many others. It's a pretty important mission that we're trying to accomplish with this work. I'm going to cover that in just a second. And without the support of all of these stakeholders and contributors, it would not be possible. And so what we're focused on is really reducing flood risk in the simplest of terms, but sort of adding this additional element, improving the floodplain management throughout the state. This is a statewide effort, and really maximizing the natural and beneficial of the floodplains. So, really thinking beyond our traditional gray infrastructure solutions and looking to more green and resilient nature-based solutions. And thinking about the Watershed Initiative as a program, this is a really good summary in addressing its guiding principles. In brief, the Watershed Initiative focuses on using scientific tools and approaches, ensuring that decision-making is both objective and transparent, looking to solutions in nature, right, part of our mission, that maximize the natural functions of the floodplain. And I think one of the things that was really relevant to one of our main funding sources is finding sort of long-term stability and depoliticized solutions in regional watershed management. So the scale of this work is really important as we talk about it. When we think about watershed-based floodplain management, it's important to make sure we're all thinking the same thing. And I'm sure this audience, y'all all know what a watershed is, but just in case we have some joining us that may be, confused by the term, it's basically a drainage basin. It's an area of land that drains to a common point. A large watershed contains other smaller watersheds, and each are bound by natural ridges and human elements in the landscape. And so if you think about a big bathtub, if you're in an area that all drains to the same point, you're sharing a basin or a watershed. If I had to describe the mantra of the initiative, this is it, right? These strategic areas of focus. As we approach new problems or consider solutions and options as a group, these are the elements that are continuously triggered for consideration. They're called out in really detail in our phase 1 investigation, which is available online on the Watershed Initiative's website. And they're intended to be coordinated to create a foundation for sound floodplain management. So I'll just spend a couple minutes here talking about each because they are very important to think about making sure we're all sort of working in the same direction and focusing on the same tenements in our efforts. And so first with data, we all agree that we have to have better data, invest in data, and make relying on data really natural in our decision-making processes. You know, the second piece really corresponds to this in talking about standards. So in thinking about data, there are a lot of questions that come up and economies of scale that we can achieve if we focus and we continuously address standardization. It's harder on the front end, right? For anybody who's done this type of work, it's really hard to get there. But once you get there and you start seeing it work, you can really start to save time, energy, and cost. With regards to engagement, right? We know that to build support for transformative change, to really reduce flood risk, we have to make sure that we're engaging early and often, and that we're maintaining both transparent and shared ownership of the solutions that we propose, right? We can't work on this in a room and then project solutions. We have to keep touching base with those that this work impacts. And then with planning, you know, we really need to just address the gaps and the overlap in water management planning across the state. There are many. And find a solution that aligns and increases efficiency across these efforts. And working across the state, we also have to acknowledge both the capability and the capacity of our stakeholder groups and our partners. And we have to meet them where they are and be prepared to build capability and capacity at a variety of scales across the state simultaneously, right? So this is very coordinated, but it's also making sure we're all moving forward together. And lastly, funding. You know, this is important. We do have a great opportunity in our funding sources today, but we have to look beyond those funding sources and think about long-term funding sources that will continue the important work that we're starting, and leverage the funding sources that we have today to ensure that the state is in a position to receive the maximum benefit. This includes looking at federal funding sources across state agencies and determining how to best align and leverage existing and ongoing efforts. So there's a lot of work that's happening that we're going to talk about today that may be part of federal or state agency missions, and where we can support that work or build capacity in those agencies, then we can reduce costs long term and make those agencies, I think, more effective in meeting their mission. As a statewide program recently launched to address all types of flood risk, right? So all types, fluvial, and coastal, the main challenge we face stems from inheriting this system of water management that's based on political boundaries. In other words, parishes or counties. In the map shown here, the gray lines depict parishes and the colored shapes depict regional watersheds that speak to how water naturally moves within the state of Louisiana, centered around its system of rivers. Recent flooding events and the increased intensity of rainfall have highlighted for everyone across the state that more must be done to address flood risk that crosses political boundaries, which acknowledges that one action or actions in a community can impact entire systems, right? And so to support changes in decision-making and increased collaboration at the regional watershed level, the state intends to use recent CDBG mitigation funds as a catalyst for change. And so this is what I was getting at, that funding source that we have today that we're sort of very fortunate to be able to work with. So let's talk a little bit about our funding status. This is specifically related to the CDBG Mitigation Action Plan, right? So to access these federal dollars that have been allocated to the state of Louisiana, we have to submit an action plan, have it approved, and then complete a grant agreement with HUD, and then we'll have access to those funds. Most of this process has been completed to date. So let's talk a little bit about what's in the action plan and its status. So HUD approved the state's action plan on February 20th of 2020. The plan details how the state will spend $1.2 billion in CDBG mitigation funds to reduce statewide flood risk. This includes more than $970 million for watershed projects and programs, as well as funding for improved data gathering and scientific modeling. The state expects the grant agreement or line of credit to be established this summer. Hopefully by the time that we do this workshop, we'll have received this grant agreement and we'll be in full swing with our program activities. As we talk about the plan and associated funds, we should also recognize that some of these programs are already underway, and that the state's been very proactive in jump-starting and kick-starting this effort. For context, we have the application process for the first round of local and regional watershed projects. This is a $100 million funding opportunity. It is currently underway. Other activities within the plan are also moving and will continue with HUD's approval. These programs include a state projects and programs project list, a non-federal cost share assistance program, our watershed monitoring, mapping, and modeling program, and the watershed policy planning and local capacity assistance program. I think it's important to just reiterate that we have not yet received access to this $1.2 billion, but that we eagerly anticipate being able to move forward with a lot of these programs and elements of these programs that are already positioned to move. All right. So in thinking about the way that we're focusing the action plan, this is a good slide that summarizes sort of the three major buckets around our efforts and how we're focusing those efforts. The first deals with watershed modeling. I think this is really important. We have to understand before we spend, right? And in anticipation of this $1.2 billion, we really need to make sure we have a good understanding of our risk. And so the state is investing in a high-quality gauge network, watershed models and maps, and a user-friendly data portal to make all this good information available to everyone around the state and the country. And secondly, we have to be able to demonstrate success, right? So we need to have flood risk reduction projects, shovels in the ground. So this could mean enhanced retention, drainage, and protection, and moving people out of harm's way. And then finally, what we spent a lot of time more recently in is these regional programs and standing up this effort. And this has to do with regional watershed coordination and getting that scale right for the decision-making that needs to take place to do better water management. And then I think putting those elements in place so we can have real solutions related to better building and land use practices that are less competitive from county to county, but more consistent to really lessen the impact of future floods. So I'm hoping y'all are following me, and we'll talk a little bit more about those programs and provide a little bit more detail so y'all can know, where we're at and how we've made progress and where we're expecting to go. So with the watershed mapping and monitoring, watershed mapping, monitoring, and modeling programs, a lot of M's, we're excited that this one's underway. This is a statewide watershed modeling effort. It really emphasizes the science-based understanding of risk. And so it's exciting. We really just have to understand our flood risk in order to manage it well, right? It's a very simple concept that I'm sure everybody understands. But it's always good to state the obvious. To this effect, the statewide H&H modeling program is getting going to position the state to better understand its risks, and we're actively working to provide modeling guidance for this program to ensure consistency in models statewide and enable the evaluation of projects with regional impacts in the years to come. I think maybe next year, if we can participate in this again, I think the nice thing would be to be able to summarize that modeling guidance. We're at the point where we've got a draft, and it's really exciting to see it come together with all of our partners' input and all the coordination, and it's really been an incredible thing to watch come together. But it's not yet totally complete, so we can't talk about it in detail at this point. But I think in a year from now, this would be a great thing to share with this audience. So I'm hoping to be able to do that and let me know. But in short, the RFPs were issued this past May. Procurement is nearly complete. At this point, we're hoping to be able to issue task orders for the 7 consultants in August or September to get them rolling. The way we're approaching the work is we're conducting the modeling at a Huck 8 scale consistent with watershed boundaries and how water naturally moves across our landscape. And we're pushing to begin the build out of the gauge network. We'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, so that it can be used to calibrate the models and enhance modeling outputs. And we're also working closely with the Corps and FEMA to ensure the modeling methodology is consistent with their practices and has cascading benefits for future end users. The modeling program, supported by the Gauge Network build-out, it will provide the foundational knowledge to make smarter decisions about managing flood risk statewide. And I have to say, watching everybody work on this, it's pretty incredible public service. It's exciting stuff that we all feel very privileged to work on. Okay, so how does the Gauge program fit into the modeling program? How does it aim to support it and other monitoring efforts? I think you all probably understand the answers to these questions more than most, so I'll just overview the objectives of the program here. In short, the objectives include monitoring water levels, flow rates, and rainfall in Louisiana's watersheds, calibrating and supporting the calibration of LWI models, providing real-time river heights, informing watershed and waterway management, and improving the quality of life in and around Louisiana's watersheds and waterways. As shown on this slide, much of the federal coordination at this point is related to standing up the modeling program. At this point, it's important to understand that FEMA is actively reviewing and collaborating on the draft modeling guidance and remains involved in consulting on the watershed model creation. The Corps is also working with the Watershed Initiative to share existing models and partner and lend expertise on modeling methodology, expense, and data collection. We were just recently advised that our Silver Jackets application with the Corps was approved, so we're excited to see this relationship continue to evolve and include funding. And then USGS is also working with the Watershed Initiative through the state's Department of Environmental Quality to build out and integrate gauge networks, as well as to manage the installation, operations, and maintenance, and data collection efforts. So that's another really fun project that we're working on that will add so many benefits to this program. All right, so with the watershed projects, so we're shifting here to this $100 million grant opportunity that we've already started to work on. What we call in Louisiana, it's often referred to as just simply round one. Now, the objective of this is really to focus on low-risk, high-impact projects. Keep in mind that we don't expect the models to be done for probably 18 to 24 months. And so the projects that we fund in the interim really have to have very low risk. And so it's a competitive program. They need to have high impacts that mitigate flood risk and incentivize the prioritization of projects through regional collaboration, right? So we want the regions to work with us to identify some of these projects and start to familiarize themselves with, what this looks like, to work on and think about project impacts at the regional scale. So just to kind of break down the way that we expect that decision-making process to take place is, the whole competitive process is up to $100 million. The state expects to score all of the applications that come in. They'll award $60 million, and then they will send the remaining projects to the regions, and each region will get to select up to $5 million of projects in their region. So that's going to total $40 million. So there's 8 regions. And we'll talk a little bit more about those regions in a minute. And so it's one application collection, and it's 2 selection processes. And if you're curious about this, if you want more information, our website has all sorts of resources, FAQs, the policies and procedures. Everything is already done, and it's in there for anyone's reference. Now, with the Regional Capacity Building Grant Program, it's interesting that we kind of talk about this one last, because it's the one I think that we're spending the most time on as we wait for these funds to become available, because it's really all about standing up processes to be able to make regional decisions later on, which is involving a lot of work. And so when we talk about moving from data to decision making, one of the things that comes to mind is that it's really important to, and I'm a planner, full disclosure, planner, program manager. I don't really introduce myself well, but it's not about me, it's about the state. So we'll pass up on that. But it's important that as we work in this and we isolate solutions at the regional level, and there's difficult decision making for these groups to make, that they feel like the decision making environment is appropriate, and that those participating in the decision making share some understanding of the issues they face, and feel as though the problems they're trying to solve are thoroughly understood. And so in Louisiana, recall that first map that I showed you, the one that was about the challenges, and think through, much of these elements about decision making were missing at the start of the Watershed Initiative. There really was no regional components that allow for water management decisions to take place and have sort of a predictive environment. And so what the Regional Capacity Building Grant Program really does is it tries to fill these gaps. And so the first success we had, I think, as a program, after meeting with parish leadership across the entire state, so this is in 64 parishes, was recognizing the watershed regions shown here to facilitate program activities. And you'll see there's 8 regions. We then issued 8 grants, 1 per region, to support staff planning, regional steering committees that would help to chart the future for each program. And what's listed here are the 8 fiscal agents that are coordinating the efforts and are the grantees for each of these planning grants. And they're tasked with formulating recommendations for the program and for the region on how they move forward. What are their long-term governance structures or solutions in enabling them to continue these water management activities that we're standing up now for the 8 regions. Each region has successfully formed their committees, which has been a really incredible process. If you're interested more about how we were able to select a fiscal agent, I'm sure you're thinking that's a lot of parishes in one group. How did you pick? Or we didn't. We had them work together to isolate their one grantee. And so all of that's really interesting. So if y'all are interested in the planning side of it, just give us a call or send us an email. But they did. They successfully isolated their fiscal agent, made their applications, put together their work plans, and they're on their way to formulating program recommendations about long-term structures, and that has begun with a discussion of their regional flood risk issues and priorities. As there's a step-by-step process involved with making these decisions, right? So you might be wondering, what does it mean to focus on regional flood risk priorities? Well, in each region, after they've approved their work plan, they each participated in what we're calling a regional flood risk discussion. And you'll see sort of Region 4's meeting is shown here. Many people are attending via Zoom, but we're also holding them in person. And these discussions are data oriented, and they aim to build a common understanding of flood risk across the region. So the committee, and the public, I'll note these are all open to the public and advertised as much. So the committee and the public can start to think about its regional priorities. And, if you're interested in these presentations, these are actually EWRI storyboards that are all available online for each region, and they have some incredible data that's all consolidated in their tools for each of the regions to build into and use to communicate risks and priorities. These discussions have been pretty well attended, largely due to the more recent extreme rainfall events and concerns coming from areas around the state that have never flooded before. Shown here are the extreme rainfall events associated with the March and August 2016 storms evaluated as part of these discussions. Let's try and see if I can't click on Region 4's flood risk link. I might be able to spend a minute or two just clicking through the presentation and make sure the screen share transfer is over. I'm going to stop my share for a minute, and I'm going to reshare it so I can make sure y'all are seeing this. Okay, I'm going to minimize a minute so you can see. Okay, so you can see here, let's see. These are the presentations that we've been doing with the steering committees, because they're actually made up of people all across the region. They have representatives from each parish sitting on the committee. And it's kind of incredible that we actually recommended the way that they were going to put their steering committees together and wanted it to be sort of diverse and representative of the region. So we provided them sort of guidance on, how to select, and, we gave them their demographics, and it was just really interesting. Try to make sure it was as inclusive and representative as possible. Let's see, I'm going to give this a minute. Let me try and do this one more time and minimize it. There we go. Okay. But you can see sort of the parishes working together in Region 4. You can also see how we look at the actual watershed. So we sort of challenge the way that we're thinking about water risk, and show how interconnected these systems are and how they're interconnected with neighboring states. We talk about the different types of flood risk. Now I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I think y'all are very familiar. We talk about different ways that we evaluate and understand flood risk. So we talk about the 1% annual chance event and 0.2%. We actually show these on the map. So we're going to give it a second. There we go. We show the coastal master plan's future projections of flood risk. We'll try to minimize this again. It might crash on me. There we go. And one of the cool things about this is that, despite the challenges of managing flood risk along the coast, it's put the state of Louisiana in a really good position to understand its risk, come up with solutions. And so this slider is showing the difference between the 1% and the 0.2%. The future projection of 30 years out with full implementation of the Coastal Master Plan. And the context that we use this in is, as we talk about a statewide initiative, is, this is what we want to be able to do statewide, right? We want to learn the lessons from the Coastal Master Plan, better understand our risk across the state, and model the rest of the state with all the lessons learned through this Coastal Master Planning process. We talk about extreme rainfall. This is something I think I pulled in the region slide. And then we go through the different types of flood. We look at rivers that have crested, areas that are flooding due to urban conditions and not due to water bodies. Give it a minute for the IA data to pop up. Maybe it won't. So one complaint, I'm sure y'all engineers experience this, is when you're relying on data and systems, sometimes it just doesn't want to share because it just takes a little bit too long to come into play. But I think this is really cool too. We have here, we talk about FEMA and sort of traditional gaps in understanding flood risk. We highlight all the special flood hazard areas. How much of the region is in a special flood hazard area. We look at A zones and B zones. And I mean, this is really about developing a common understanding at the region, thinking about a regional flood risk profile. We look at severe repetitive loss and repetitive loss region-wide. And then we do this assessment of the 2016 floods. These were the events that prompted these mitigation dollars that the state is currently awaiting. Let's see, there we go. But you can see sort of the collection of data points and damages around the river systems. And when you zoom in, you'll actually notice that a lot of these properties are located outside of the special flood hazard area. So, they were not required to buy flood insurance or build to meet certain higher building standards that are for buildings that are located in areas subject to inundation. Let's see, I'm going to give it a minute. Maybe it'll load. It's been raining a lot in Louisiana today. And so all of our internet connections are running a little slower. So I am going to pause the recording so if there's a little blip, I'm sorry, y'all. I want to just give it a minute to load and not have y'all sit around and wait. Okay, it's working now. It took a minute. This is the benefits of having pre-recorded presentation. But I think as y'all look, and I think, part of the problem right now is we have the regions are actively putting information into these tools. And so I noticed someone was actually in here adding data points. So that's really exciting. But an aside, but you'll see here, if you notice, this is your special flood hazard area. And you'll see all these points of severe, major, or minor damage outside of these areas. So these people probably had a harder time recovering, experienced damage, and likely did not have insurance. And so we're having the regions look at this closely and provide their experience and expertise in making sure that this is accurately reflecting their conditions and telling the story of flood risk in their region. Another piece that we're continuing to emphasize that's consistent with the mission is looking at sort of the wetlands areas and how we can better work with nature. As we ask these groups to think about projects at the regional scale, we want to make sure that they're thinking about how they can best pair them with secondary benefits to natural functions, or actually optimize those natural functions to see flood risk reduction, maybe by slowing water or storing water, or reestablishing some natural processes that may be disrupted by a conveyance structure in the region. And then lastly, in thinking about flood risk holistically, we have here the CDC Social Vulnerability Index. We want our regions to be thinking about where it floods, how it floods, and who it's impacting. And we have to make sure that those that are the most vulnerable in our communities that may be subject to the highest vulnerability or highest risk of not being able to recover, that we're prioritizing solutions for those areas. And so we kind of put together a mapping exercise, kind of exciting, that have these insets, and I think it's in here. It may or may not be. It's not. But if you look on the Watershed Initiative website, you'll see mapping exercises with insets that show all those different layers overlapping each other, to think about how we prioritize risk, how we understand it, and it's very exciting to see these members talk about their flood risk, how they come to understand their issues, and have them weigh in on these presentations to question, things that may be accurately presented or things that may not. And I think in doing these presentations, we're really seeing them come to a common understanding. We have had this added challenge of COVID-19 and this public health emergency that's making it harder to be accessible to the public. But I will say, despite these challenges, we have witnessed each region adapt to virtual settings well and maintain progress towards their goals. And that's been really exciting to see them run their meetings and do a really great job. Now, in thinking about those discussions around regional flood risk, it's important to know that they're intended to provide really foundational information for a future root cause analysis, right? And when I say future, I mean by the time this airs, we may have already completed some of these between now and August. And, the idea here is that once the state and its regional partners understand really well the gaps in responsibility and funding and capacity, all participating in this process are just in a better position to understand the need for governance. I think it's really important to note that when I say the word governance, I can kind of feel some of y'all recoil. I don't know. I live in the South, right? So it's not a good word here. And so I think it's really important that we say what that means. And so what I'm referring to are three things: accountability, authority, and process. So this is where roles and responsibilities are clearly defined, where decision makers are empowered to face difficult issues, and where the processes by which decisions are made are standardized and based on best practices, right? That's where we really get the work done. And so, I think these flood risk discussions across the state have been really successful, and we really look forward to these next steps. There will be challenges that we'll face, and I'm hoping that in the workshop that we're doing today, I'll be in a much better position to talk about the challenges and how we've been doing with this. But so far, we are managing, and we're, I think, doing so fairly well, despite these challenges. And so should any of y'all have questions, I can either, take them at the end, or I'm not sure if we're going to be doing them during this. But you can always email them to watershed@la.gov. Our website has an enormous amount of information, not to the point where it's not useful, but it's organized, and if you need something, that's a good place to look. And finally, just thank y'all for having me, and for allowing me time to tell y'all about this really important work going on in Louisiana. I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak, and appreciate all the efforts by ASCE and EWRI to put everything together. So thank y'all very much. I hope this was helpful, and looking forward to additional discussions.